So I'm sitting here with Gino Canessa. Gino, would you like to just tell everyone what you do real quick?
Sure. Thanks. I'm, like I said, Gino Canessa. I work at Microsoft Research in a group called Health Futures. And our remit is to try and raise all boats by improving digital healthcare everywhere. So it's a very fun role. I'm very grateful that Microsoft has a team like us that can come out and do these things really for the public good.
What have you learned? What have been some new things that you have discovered?
Oh, at this year's FHIR camp, I think that just the discussions that we've had on the versioning and profiling, the security, some more of the deep dives into analytics on FHIR, they're all topics I'm familiar with, but it's always good to get more information, to find out new things. Particularly, I like finding out the differences in understanding. We always try to write the specs as clearly as possible. But there's a lot more variance than we'd like in how we understand them. Even Graham and Lloyd discuss the finer points of some things that they disagree on. Is always a lot of fun to learn.
Yeah. And we had yesterday there was a chat about the history of FHIR, and I kind of got a sense that FHIR camps, that this is really important to kind of recapture the old school days where everyone was kind of, really developing and emerging standard. Do you reckon that FHIR camp is doing that? And do you think that there's ever a risk that the community grows too large and alienates that aspect?
Yeah, so I think definitely the context of FHIR camp and the feel of it is very nice. We talk about this at some of the larger meetings, and a lot of the people who are presenting and running and sharing and things like that, we're all very oversubscribed. And so it's, we end up having a lot of very late night meetings to try and get, Q7, Q8, which I love that they're called quarters because, But here at FHIR Camp, it's a much more intimate, much more personal feel, and we can really work on those relationships and have these deeper discussions. Like you were saying, talking about the history of FHIR. There's a lot of information there that I was unaware of. I'm a relative latecomer to FHIR comparatively, and it's very interesting because there isn't space for that kind of discussion at most events. And so having this space where we can all talk freely and communicate and work on those relationships and friendships is very valuable, in addition to the actual technical and everything else that we get to discuss. Yeah. As far as growing too big, it's always a concern, especially these days that, things are more expensive. And so conferences need to balance content with everything else. And it's challenging at a lot of these events to do too many things. And so work group meetings have their role, and Connectathons have their role, and Dev Days has its role. And so it's very hard to branch out from those roles because there's a lot of investment in all of these events and the people who come and everything else and what their expectations are. And so having a new event, I realize it's second year, but in the context of everything, a newer event that fills another role is, to me, very welcome and, a wonderful thing.
We kind of glanced at the last talk on tooling, and that was in the context of transitioning between versions. You come from the Microsoft world. What tools do you think are indispensable for in the Microsoft world?
Oh, yeah. So there's a lot. In my opinion, there's a lot of space for tooling. And I mentioned this during one of the sessions yesterday about I called it the pyramid of pain, which say there are a lot of very deep technical things that are very frustrating, difficult, or take a lot of hours to work on. The pyramid of pain is just, if you visualize a pyramid, the number of people at each layer. So when you talk about something like the FHIR standard itself, there are a small group of people kind of at the top of the pyramid who are dealing with the very deep internals of building and publishing the standard. There's a wider group that gives feedback and is involved there. Again, there's no less importance, just number of people physically. Right. So then you say, there are more people who can come and participate. They don't edit the standard, but they give good feedback on it and things like that. Then there's an even wider set that are just people who are using the standard, consuming it. Yeah. And so when we talk about a lot of this tooling and SDK layer things and things like that, I visualize it the same way to say, building all these cross-version extensions and things like that, I've spent several hundred hours working on, but that's one person. If I don't do that work, if none of us do that work and take on that responsibility at that top one, 1-2 person layer, then that pain just gets punted down to the next bigger group. And then you say, well, every author has to deal with this. And then a lot of them say, well, something there looks good enough. So then I actually pass it to the implementers. And now we have thousands of who are dealing with that same pain. And so I like to look at things like that when we talk about leverage to say, even if it's something that takes me several hundred hours, if I can save 1,000 people 20 hours each, I didn't spend 20,000 hours on it. So that was a good investment on my time. And so it's really just looking at the number of people that you're affecting with it. So as we look at tooling and SDKs and things like that, I always try to keep that in mind to say, if we can build out, the core definitions for a language, that takes a lot of time if someone hasn't built that before and saying, I'm going through by hand and reading the specs and building out these models, copying, pasting JSON to get classes and all these different things. It's just a lot of time and effort that's being replicated time and time again. So on all of those fronts, if we build out more tooling, it saves more people more time.
And one last question, which is what developments are you excited for in 2025 in the FHIR world?
Oh, in 2025 in the FHIR world, I think one of the biggest things is marching towards R6, that hopefully we will be ready to do the ballots for that. And kind of the final ballots, we've been doing some of the pre-existing work, the draft ballots, but getting that nailed down and really sorting through all of these versions and cross versions and all those things. I've been very focused on that now for several months. So to me, that's one of the big things that I'm very excited to get there. And then just more adoption. I've done a lot of work with subscriptions, and there's more and more demand and implementation for that. So it's always nice seeing something go through that whole process of, defining the standard and working with implementers and doing those revisions and getting it published and doing more revisions and getting it published and then finally seeing it in production. So I'm personally very excited about that as well. So perfect.
Thank you, Gino, so much. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the subscriptions since R5, to be honest. Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Kurt. Cheers.